And we are rolling. Awesome. All right. Welcome to the Monday after daylight savings time, right?
Right.
What what a day. Sorry guys, we're a few minutes late here. Technical difficulty on so bear with us.
Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome to YouTube. Welcome to our three Facebook pages, our two Instagram pages, Twitch, Rumble, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. So, welcome, everyone. Happy Monday, like you said, after the daylight savings time.
Yes. It's been a day. Tired kids, tired people. It's been a day.
It
But how about
has.
you?
Yeah, it's been a day for me. I worked all day today, and then I worked another project I had tonight, and then in between that, I was doing laundry. So, and then we have our podcast. Here we are. Happy Monday.
Yes. For sure. Welcome, Karen. I see you in the chat. Welcome to Instagram friends as well. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's it's a day, but I'm excited for our conversation tonight. Kind of gave a little bit away on my walk yesterday. It's been really nice here in Nebraska, so I went on a walk, and I'm like, oh, I'll take Instagram with me as I was walking down the road. So they went with me, and I also talked about it in the first part of our BNC meetings too. So little teaser there.
Right. Everybody's going, what are we talking about?
I know. Well, they probably ended up and seen it on the little thing for the reminder for tonight. Um, as far as what we were macros, what I title it, macros, portions, and more.
Yes.
Um, something to that effect, anyway.
Yes.
So there's don't really know where else to start, but other than to jump in, right?
Right.
Many people are familiar with tracking macros um, in order to control or follow a certain lifestyle or dietary camp. Um, Part of what I have done, and I know we'll talk about what you're doing and the part of your journey, but the part of the journey that I am on currently is not necessarily tracking specific macros. I've had a lot of people over on Instagram that have followed me over the years and know that I've done, high fat macros, I've done seasonal low carb macros, but I've always been tied to a macro calculator or a macro percentage. Um, and when I chose to step away from that, man, how long ago was it that I gave up all my tracking devices?
Oh my goodness. Oh, well over what, 10, 11 months, 10 months ago?
Let's just say it's been a
It's
while.
been a little bit.
And the thing that I find in clients when they are focusing solely on macros, they start to get very restrictive. They start to get very obsessive. They no longer find that balance in a meal. And then they ultimately start eating less. So, and I'll, I'll even throw myself out there because when I did the high fat, I would always talk about, the composition of my food looked a lot different than, when I was doing keto. Keto, I had the volume, I had the, um, that aspect to it, if you will. And so when I did a high fat, because fat obviously carries more energy density to it, um, the food looked a little different. And I've even manipulated around to where I mentally tell myself I'm eating enough by having a smaller plate, right? Smaller plate, plate's fuller. You end up and you think that you're eating more when in reality, you start to eat less and less and less. And so you start to get into this aspect of under eating, down regulating metabolism, affecting hormones. But yet there's the flip side of it too, right? I understand some people have to build their meals around a structure so that they can prevent overconsumption, because even if you're eating the right food, you're eating the healthy foods, you can still overconsume. So
Mm-hmm.
where do you find a delicate balance between the two? And for anyone watching, let us know in the chat, where do you find a delicate balance between tracking versus not tracking? And what has worked for you? But I know at this point, before I go into where I transitioned from out of macros, because that was a big part of my journey, where are you at in tracking macros? Do you track
I'm not
macros? Do you
tracking.
not track macros?
Not right now, for the most part, I don't. Now, every once in a while, I'll plug something in just to see, am I hitting, because I need to hit a certain amount of my protein right now because of the GLP-1 that I'm on. I don't want to lose muscle. So there is a very conscious effort on my part to make sure I'm getting enough of that. But I've also had to throw in good carbs as well. But am I tracking it? For the most part, very rare do I plug something in to see what's going on. I guess I've been doing it long enough that I can visually see. Um, I know what 4 ounces looks like. I know that if I eat, 3, 4 eggs and, 4 strips of bacon, and I add my raw yogurt to it, and maybe a little bit of Parmesan cheese, I know exactly what I'm getting because I have tracked it. But I did it for so long that it became a chore. And then I stopped and I started allowing myself to do intuitive eating because eating shouldn't be that much trouble, right? Now I understand when you're getting started, you absolutely should track. You do need to know where you're at. I've got a new client right now. She is just starting out. She's having to do keto for medical reasons. I gave her a food list, and she says, "Well, tell me how much to eat." And I said, "No." I said, "All I want you to do right now is eat off this list." I said, "We will dial that in later, but right now just eat off the list." And she was like, "Okay, I can do that." And she called me the other night and said, "Well, I can't have dairy because of this medical reason." And I said, "That's fine, but she can eat Greek yogurt. She can," and we talked about eating like goat cheese, which is different than just having the milk dairy, right? The
Mhm.
or the cow dairy, I mean. So we talked about that, but right now, honestly, I don't want her tracking. She just needs to change how she's eating for this medical condition that she has, and she was really good with that. It's like, I'm going to ease you into this. We're not going to. Um, I'm not going to hold you to a hard, fast rule. Eventually, we may get there, but
Mhm.
it depends on how you're doing, right? Because I don't think the go to should be, oh, you need to plug in everything you're eating. Maybe at first it's a good idea because some people just plain don't know how many carbs they're eating in a day or something like that. So, but I'm, I'm seeing in my clients the need to have, and I call it the Weight Watchers effect, of this is worth so many points. This is how much I eat. How much is that? I mean, when you and I post our food on social media, I mean, people ask us literally, how much was
Mhm.
that? How many ounces was that? And you and I don't tell people what it is because what I require is different than what you require and vice versa.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it on the head there of the intuitive side of the eating, right? Food is fuel. It shouldn't control us. And that's where many people, it has such a tight grasp on them that they're
Mhm.
tracking every bite. They're fearing certain food. They're feeling guilty if they eat too much of this or the wrong thing of that, or oh my gosh, you know, it has these ingredients, right? And they start to be very, very restrictive. And so creating macros for some that have that obsession type mentality can backfire, but macros can end up and be a useful can't even talk. Macros can be a useful tool for some when they start to get into that gray area. I will agree with that, where if you need to hone in on things, you don't have that, you know, visual sight, and I'll end up and I'll give people a little bit of, you know, graphics, right? You called me the other day and I was laughing hysterical because I was creating these graphics. But and
Well,
then I'll
wait. No, I called her the other day and she's laughing and she goes, I'm playing with my food. And I'm like, what? And so I'll let you pick up from there.
yeah, I was playing with my food. I was creating graphics, but it was I needed a visual representation. And so that's where, you know, using it as a guide, so that you're not having to put food on a scale, because then, you know, do you weigh it raw? Do you weigh it cooked? Do you weigh it steam? You know, what do you do, right? And people get very overwhelmed. And so trying to come up with a way for clients, for community members, that it supports, you know, their energy, it supports their hormone health, it supports their metabolic function, all of this without the obsession, and being able to shift, right? Create that metabolic flexibility, because ultimately, when we're looking at metabolic health, when we're looking at a circadian rhythm perspective, when we're looking, you know, everything that we end up and speak to, recovery, natural cycle, you know, all of this, when we end up when we speak to it, it should come as that intuitive side. It shouldn't have to be micromanaged and portioned, with restriction, right? So that's where it's not always about eating less, it's eating right and managing these so that you have the visual cues so that you can eat more intuitive. And with that being said, um, I will end up and show my graphics. In the real reason of why I created these was for that, because it's not always about, you know, the willpower. It's more about how do you balance a meal, right? A lot of people, maybe let's take a step back. Maybe people don't even realize what is a macro.
Right.
What are, you know, proteins, fats, carbs, the difference in carbs, right? You were on an interview, I have said it before, of consuming healthy carbs. What does that look like? I'm not talking about going out and eating pizza,
Right.
right? Or eating a bagel at the donut shop, you know.
Right.
That's not the carbs I'm talking about, friends. I'm talking about those that are going to help with your hunger, help with your blood sugar, balancing, and be able to structure a meal where you're not counting every bite and morsel. Um, the way that we've kind of come up with, um, will also prevent from the binge cycles. So many people, when they end up and they restrict and, um, eliminate, it creates kind of this monkey mind where it wreaks havoc on their satiety, on their cravings. So then they end up and undereat or restrict, and then they binge, and that can create a horrible, um, cycle as well, because they'll end up and they'll be lacking the willpower, they'll crave, and then they end up and next thing you know, they're, you know, nose deep in a bunch of overeating food. Not get Trying not to trigger anyone with any, you know, too many references of foods, but they don't focus on micronutrients that hit the satiety deficiencies. And I know we have several that are watching the YouTube right now too, as well as over on Instagram, that have been able to come out of that full elimination restriction and start to add things in, and they start to thrive with it. So if that is you, um sorry, I was reading one of our comments. Deciding on what to eat causes so much stress. Easier to just skip it sometimes, which isn't necessarily good either for the hormones and for the metabolism either, to do over fasting. Not that I'm against fasting, but over fasting and not having a structure to it. There's a difference in a rigid macro tracking obsession and a structure, right? I end up and I have a structure. I meal plan every week. I know, what I'm doing. And so how do let me get my screens going here. So how do I create this, right, without the need for, I can't click buttons and type or talk. So how do I end up and create this when a person is tired of tracking macros? So that's where, can you see it full screen?
Yes.
Okay. So tired of tracking macros and using your hand as a guide, right? I've had people that are traveling, or people that are clients that are out to eat, and they're like, but I don't have a food scale. And that almost creates even more anxiety, to where they start to self-isolate. Part of our, going out or bonding with friends, having dinner with a companion, is the aspect of being able to bond and that connection, and getting outside of our home, doing that. But for someone that is tracking macros, for instance, you asked me, I went out to eat on Saturday, and you asked me how my meal was. Well, I had chicken wings, right? Well, someone that was tracking macros, that would have sent them in a tailspin, because they're like, oh my gosh, I couldn't weigh them before. How much was the bone? How much do I track? How much do I log? How much, it's like this cycle of obsessiveness. And instead of just being able to go out and enjoy the meal. And that's where using your hand, right? So I've often told clients, depending where you're at, as far as how much you need, this is where figuring out how much protein do you truly need. I will typically recommend anywhere about 0.75 to 1.5 per kilogram, depending on the person, depending on their activity level, depending on age, height, etc. If you end up and have 4 ounces, there's roughly 6 ounces or 6 grams of protein in an ounce. So 6 times 4 is 24. So if you have 24, 25-ish grams of protein, that's about the size of your palm. If you end up and you have, the full size of your whole hand, it's about 6 ounces. 6 times 6 is 36, right? A lot of the protein that is floating around, especially on social media right now, is saying somewhere about 30 to 40 grams. If you have 6 ounces in a meal, you're hitting 36. So you're right in there for the muscle synthesis. Again, it's Monday and I can't talk. So, with that being said, that's a good, easy way. You can visualize, that on your plate. Now, most people, do protein and fats, which we're going out of order here. So we'll end up and we'll backtrack. Non-starchy carbs. If you are someone that is doing a carbs, right? When we talk about carbs, what is carbs? So there's the difference in non-starchy carbs and starchy carbs. When you look at things like a baked potato, a sweet potato, beets, pumpkin, butternut squash, those are all starchy carbs, which we'll get to. But the non-starchy carbs are things like the broccoli, the cauliflower, cucumbers, pickles, arugula, lettuce. We're starting to transition into springtime, where a lot of those bitters are going to be able to come into play. You're also going to start to get some of these other foods. For instance, asparagus. Some people have green beans. Some people, are getting the spring greens too. So when we start to open up this seasonal eating and transition, having a cupped handful. This is why I was laughing, is because I was literally playing with my food to
Yeah.
create these graphics. So and try to answer the phone while I'm, taking pictures. So that's why it was comical. But a cupped handful is a serving. Now that's roughly, a cup of cooked, right? So if I was to take that cupped handful and put it into a measuring cup, that's going to be roughly a cup. Now, some people do lower carb days, some people do the higher carb days. So if you're doing, the lower carb, you may end up and have 1 or 2 servings of these lower carbs. So like I said, including, with every meal, for the fiber, for the micronutrient, for gut health. The gut likes diversity, but remember, these foods also give a secondary circadian signal. These foods can also help keep blood sugar stable. You've seen that. You've started to add cucumbers in. You started to add other foods in. And what have you seen? I know we've got others that are watching. So comment what in the chat or in on Instagram in regards of what you've seen with being able to reintroduce some of these foods, even when we did the meat fat ferments, because that incorporates a non-starchy carb too, is your things like your sauerkraut and kimchi. But what have you seen in your blood sugar with incorporating some of these non-starchy carbs?
Well, let's back up for a minute. So I was so militant, right, on not getting any carbs, maybe a couple in a day, because I was so fixated on being so strict carnivore because I was trying to take care of my type 2 diabetes. And what I ended up doing was tanking my thyroid and my hormones, and my body literally stopped being able to handle good carbs. It was the first time that I ate a baked potato, and I ate my protein first and then ate the baked potato. Sweet potato. It went up, what was it? Something like 90 point jump on my blood sugar. And I about flipped out. But um, I had to start teaching my body to be able to handle. Uh, I had to retrain myself, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So so what am I doing now? Well, I have found out that I can no longer be strict carnivore. My thyroid, my hormones, my brain, my body depends on good carbs. Now, I'm not talking about, a couple hundred in a day. I carb up 1 day a week, but I'm slowly adding things back in. Like yesterday, I went to the grocery store and I got a bunch of vegetables that I can grill, like on a skewer. I got, cucumber. I've been fresh parsley. I still do my pickle. I still do my, and I'm slowly adding things back in. And you know what's happening to my blood sugar? The spikes aren't as high. My
Mm-hmm.
body's able to handle it. Now, do you get a spike after you eat? Absolutely, you do. And it shouldn't be 80, 90 points like when I first started back on just eating a sweet potato. But now I'm only seeing like small jumps, maybe 20 points, sometimes 30, depending on what the carb is, the good carb that I'm adding. And within 2 hours, it's back to baseline, if not less. So my body's learning how to handle them. And I think that's a big mistake with people that are so rigid on one dietary way of eating is you're doing your body a disservice.
Mm-hmm.
Even changing macros. I've had to change macros. And what did I text you the other day? Because I've noticed my blood sugar is now going down to normal ranges. And I
Mhm.
said, oh, I need to put my CGM, my continuous glucose monitor, back on, and I need to monitor what's going on. Now, am I tracking? No, I am not, but I know what I'm eating and I'm watching what my blood sugar is doing because I know that I may need to change up how I'm eating, and that's okay. But again, I'm not tracking it. Now, I tracked it this morning because I posted a picture on social media, and it was my eggs, bacon. I had um my yogurt, and I put a little bit of Parmesan cheese on it, and I added some fresh uh, parsley, parsley leaves in it. So I plugged it in, and I posed the question, would you know how many macros this was? And do you know, not one person said yes. Everybody came back and said no. Now I knew before I plugged it in exactly what that was, um, because I am trying to eat a certain amount of protein, fats, and carbs. So I knew what that was going to read, and I plugged it in just to see the reading, and I was within like 1 point in grams off of what the protein was, but I knew it. Um, and again, um, you start to loathe eating. You start to loathe, um, oh my gosh, I can't eat that. Oh my gosh, I can't have that. And I was that person for a very, very long time.
Mhm. Well, and I end up and I see that in my clients too. I see the aspect of them getting very, very strict. I see them getting, so I get where people have to, right? There are certain conditions where they must. But I've also seen people that end up and eat too much protein and it leads to more imbalances, whether it's an imbalance in macros, decreased satiety, which seems odd, right? If I'm eating more protein, why would I end up and be more hungry? But it does. It creates
Yeah.
this want or need, right? And so that satiety starts to decrease. I've seen people with their insulin levels, um, they get rising fasted insulin, A1C, their glucose numbers start to end up and go up. And that's where, shifting this. And that's why, again, I have it, 4 to 6 ounces because what works for you? Trust me, I did the 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight rule, right?
Yep.
Um, but it didn't work for me. And so when I
Nope.
changed it to, what I ended up and showed, which was the palm to the fingertip size, right? Satiety improved, energy improved. I mean, the list goes on. I've started tracking the scale. Now, yes, I'm in, my dungeon. So that factors in there too, but the scale is moving in the proper direction. And so, but it's not necessarily always just about the protein and that it's also about adding some of these other um carbs in because when you I'm going back to sharing my screen here. When you start to add not only the non-starchy carbs, but you also understand what a starch carb looks like, right? What does
Mhm.
this is a part of a sweet potato. It's not a whole sweet potato, right? I know you've had a coach with someone else that had you eating a bunch of carbs that created that glycemic response. Where if you end up and you tailor, right, to this fist
Right.
size serving of a starchy carb, yes, you may end up and get a glycemic response, but typically it's not going to be don't eat a starchy carb or a carb, naked carb. Eat it with your protein and your fats. But if you end up and you have this and I know you've added sweet potato in, and the more you kind of are able to do it, the body gets more receptive of it.
Mhm.
And it creates that flexibility that we're looking for in order to adjust your energy and your metabolic health, right? Being able to get those receptors, get the insulin working the way that it should, get the glucose so that it's not creating these massive peaks, but it creates more of a meal response, time under the curve. And that's where when you end up and you add the fist size, which a fist size portion is roughly 30 grams of carbs. And yes, I am referencing this, and Sherry has seen my food scale. It's pretty damn accurate.
I know. And what did I say to you? Ooh, where did you get that food scale? And then you sent me the link to it, and I looked it up, and then I thought, well, why am I have a food scale? Number one, it's in the box. I don't get it out very often. Now, why am I going to get a second food scale when honestly, I'm not using it? Because
Yeah.
again, I know, right, how much this is for me, for my size of palm, because I've measured, I've weighed it out. I know, right? We've figured that out. But you know what? That's why I can go into a restaurant and I can eyeball the piece of steak that I'm having, and I know approximately what I'm getting. And so, no, Becky, I'm not ordering your
Which
scale.
the only I mean, man, what I could look back at the picture I sent you, because I've had that scale since 2017, I think is when I purchased it.
Yeah.
So I've had it forever, and half the time it's tucked up in behind everything. But the only reason I drug it out was for the sake of, the pictures, because you're always going to get someone saying, well, that's not accurate. Well, 4.02 on a 4-ounce portion of protein is pretty damn accurate.
Right.
If I do say so myself. And I
Right.
don't remember the 6-ounce, but I do have that comparison. But the fist size, amount of a starchy carb is roughly going to be about 30 grams of carbs. So if we talk about putting, 30 grams of a carb at your lunch and your dinner, or maybe you're, someone that is just doing it once a day, and that's fine, depending on, again, on your body, right? If someone is coming from an extremely low carb, adding too many carbs in a day, the body's going to be like, whoa, wait, what is this? And so
Right.
being able to slowly come up, we talk about 20 to 30 grams carbs. Now you end up and roughly, right? What
Hmm.
is a portion? A portion can end up and be somewhere, a cup size if it's a non-starchy,
Hmm.
and a fist size if it's, full. Now your cup size hand of non-starchy carbs is not going to be 30 grams of carbs, because your non-starchy carbs are lower glycemic.
Right.
So, it's going to end up and be less, but that's one way of starting to kind of get an idea so that you can step away from the food scales. The other thing that is very controversial amongst many in the spaces of food is, how much fat do you truly need with a meal or in a day, right? You hear you've got to eat a stick of butter, you hear you've got to eat, lean meats, you hear this whole
Yeah.
controversial side, but your body ends up and needs fat. Your body needs cholesterol. Let me rephrase that. Your body needs the cholesterol. Your cholesterol is the backbone of pregnenolone. It makes your hormones, it makes your sex hormones, helps control cortisol. So fat calorically is very high in energy density. So if you're consuming, way more than your body needs, you again can't overconsume something that is good for you and still expect to see progress. So too much.
But where that comes in is when you're eating a large amount of fat and a large amount of carbs. Therein lies a big problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's where you have both energy sources. So I always reference a seesaw, right? So okay, let me go back to the portion size first, and then I'll end up and I'll reference it. Portion size of fat, the portion of your thumb, is roughly a tablespoon of fat. So if for reference sake, that is a tablespoon of fat is the length of your thumb. Um, so with that being said, as you had asked in regards of where I'm trying to choose my words wisely, right? Uh, because I I get some people end up in need more. Some people need less, but you can undereat on too low a fat. But when you end up and you have the fat and the carbs, those are both your energy sources. So what you need to look at is when one comes up, the other needs to come down, not out. That's where the misconception comes from. Is people will do a high carb, high protein, and then they have very little long-term fat, right? That can end up and lead to a problem. Same thing with the flip side of it, right? Which is where several have been, is a high fat, adequate protein or high protein with no carbs in there, and you're not getting that response from the body as far as the insulin goes. So how do you create a flexibility if you're going to end up and figure out your protein, the protein that works for you, adequate protein for your body, your lifestyle, your environment, n equals 1, figure that out. For, like I said, I gave you kind of a reference hint. It's not necessarily the 1 gram per pound of body weight that many
Correct.
people think they need, but it's not necessarily as low as what the recommendation on the bottom side of it is either. So I do feel like many people can undereat on protein. You've got to have protein in there, especially if you are active. You need that for the muscle. There's no way around that. So adequate protein is the first thing of your meal. And then you end up and figure out, are you going to have your non-starchy carb, kind of a higher fat, lower carb meal? Then you need, like I said, the fat in there if it's going to end up and be lower carb. If you're going to have the higher carb, then that fat comes down. Typically with clients, I will say 1-to-1 with your protein. So things like a ribeye is a 1-to-1 fat and protein. You don't necessarily need to add fat to that meal. It's got that healthy fat of the ribeye in there, but then you've also got the energy source, which is the carbs.
Right. Well, and one of the things, you touched on satiety, and a telltale sign, your body will tell you. Your body will tell you if you are uh, hungry or not, right? So when I notice that come 8 o'clock at night and I want to start snacking, I realize I'm hungry, and that told me I didn't eat enough today. Um, so, but when I make sure I hit the adequate protein with the right amount of good carbs, or the starchy or the non-starchy, along with the fat, guess what? I go to bed. I'm not hungry. I'm still satisfied. So the body gives you clues and cues that will tell you what's going on. And if you're doing too much fasting, um, you are way under eating. And our bodies were not made for that. Because again, that's going to start working on your hormones, your thyroid, and all kinds of problems are going to come with fasting too much. And we had our fasting podcast here. When was that? A couple weeks ago.
A couple weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah, because we were talking about that because we were seeing so many people eat. Oh, I'm doing the sardine fast, and oh, I'm doing the water fast, and oh, I'm doing the fat fast, or oh, I'm doing this fast, and the egg fast, and it's like, why? Why? What is the purpose? You know, do you think you're going to lose weight that way? Is that what you're driving for here?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because again, you're going to undereat. And then when you eat again, your body's going to grab hold of everything and hang on to it for dear life because you just starved it. People don't realize that.
Yeah. And I see our comments in the chat. This seems so complicated. No wonder I haven't been able to figure out what to eat. And it's really not complicated.
Mm-mm.
So when you look at your meal and how to kind of get out of, right, break free of this restriction mentality, you figure out your protein.
Right?
And again, are you working out? Are you active? Are you heavily lifting? Then you may need more than, more closer to that 6 ounces. Men may end up need, 8 to 10 ounces. You may end up in need to, boost that if you are heavily working out. Now, strength training specifically, not necessarily, advocate of hours in the gym doing cardio, but if you are strength training, because when you are restricting or you're eating too low of that protein, the the body ends up and starts to compensate, right? I had heard earlier in regards of when you're working out, right, and you deplete through the body's glycogen stores or the glucose stores in roughly 20 to 30 minutes. It takes 3 minutes for the body to tap into lean muscle mass. 3 minutes. It takes 5 hours for it to tap into fat reserves when you aren't necessarily in ketosis and a fat burner. So, with that being said, then the body ends up and repairs the lean muscle mass and you start the cycle all over again, which is where you get into your, what the, pardon my language, what the hell do I do? Because nothing seems to be working, because what you
Right.
do on this day ends up and repairs overnight and you start the cycle over. And so being able to break free, it's not necessarily about the willpower, but it's starting to rebuild that trust in food. And that's where figuring out, the protein amount and then the energy, as far as, are you doing carb days? And I see the question over on Instagram, and I'll get to that too. But are you doing carbs? Are you cycling those back in? We have, listeners that are listening that are also diabetic, and so you got to kind of be strategic with those as far as what you're incorporating. If I end up and I tell her, to go eat a serving of a sweet potato at lunch and a serving of sweet potato at dinner, her glucose as a type 1 is going to end up and be, a lot different than what mine would. So it's going to play this aspect. But when you are building that trust with food, start with your protein. That is the structure of your meal. That's going to be pretty much your constant. And then switch between your fuel sources. So when you end up and you have your lower carb days, end up and have some healthy fats in there. Those are the days where I will put avocado in there. I'll put a little, I made some shrimp and some salmon, and I have compound butter with those. So I have some of those herbs, garlic with the shrimp. I sauteed some lower glycemic things like cauliflower, some green beans. I'm trying to think what else I meal prep today on my some bell peppers. So I made like a fajita, chicken fajita bowl with the riced cauliflower. But on that day, I used olive oil when I sauteed the peppers. So, and then, like I said, the chicken and shrimp. Well, the chicken had olive oil or butter, sorry, garlic butter. And then the shrimp and salmon had the compound basil, garlic. I'm trying to think what else I put in that butter. But anyway, it had the fats. So on the other days where I have things like this roasted sweet potato that I just stuck in the oven and roasted, I do have a carb source, but then I also have a non-carb or non-starchy carb with my protein. So it's protein, non-starchy, and a starch, right? You don't necessarily want 2 fistfuls of the sweet potato because that's where you're really going to end up and get a glycemic response. So essentially, how I end up and suggest building a meal is start with your protein, start with at least a serving of your healthy fats. If you're going to do a higher carb, then I'm going to put things like a ribeye. If it is a leaner source, such as chicken, turkey, fish, then I may add that compound butter so that you end up and still have that, because again, remember, your fat and protein should be close to 1 to 1. If I'm going to do a serving of starchy carb, then I'm going to only have 1 serving of the non-starchy. But if I'm doing the lower carb, I may have 2. So I may have things like green bean and cauliflower. But then, yeah, your starch. And to answer the question, so the question on Instagram was, when you do a carb up 1 day a week, how many carbs do you eat in a meal, and how many meals do you eat per day? I always eat 3 meals per day.
Me too.
Well, let me backtrack.
Well,
99%
yeah,
of the time,
yeah,
I end up
me
and I
too.
eat 3 meals a day. I don't do extreme fasting. I will put the occasional fast in there. That's why I said, let me backtrack and do 99% of the time, because I will do more of and yes, Sly, I will get it out there, but I'm working on a program in regards of eating with the moon, as well as, the seasons. So with that, there does come fasting based on the moon. But to answer the question of how many carbs, when you carb up 1 day a week, how many carbs do you end up and eat in a day? That's where everyone's going to differ. So if you're coming from, and that's why coaching comes in really well,
Right.
because the coach can work with you on, which remind me, I've got an announcement for my Instagram. I guess I can give it to YouTube too, but at the end of this. But anyway, if I tell one of my clients that they are, coming off of low carb, they may end up and start at somewhere between 10 and 20 grams of carbs. That's what when we did the meat, fat, and ferments, and we put the fermented foods in there, we had people that were coming from a elimination type diet, and putting just those carbs in there were enough for the body. Now, how many do I put in there specifically? I can be 100 plus. When I started reintroducing carbs back in 2021, after my stint of, full elimination, I would get the same response. My body was like, whoa, wait, what is this? And so I worked my way up. I have created that metabolic flexibility to the point where it does end up and take me more to figure out, how much I end up and I truly need. So for some, that can end up and be 50 to 60. For some, that can be 100. For some, that can even be a little bit more depending on your body. But like I said, that's where coaching ends up and comes in, is because your coach would end up and work with you on where you're at in regards of adding that. When you were pretty low carb and you added things in, you went up to that, I would say pretty much 100 grams, and it backfired. It didn't work for you because you were so strict.
Yeah, yeah. I remember one day, and this has been a couple years ago, but
Mhm.
the person that I was working with had me carb up, and so I went to a Mexican restaurant, and I had the rice, and I had the flour tortilla, and I had my CGM on, and it it was so bad that my CGM didn't register. That's how bad my um, glucose went up. Like it was off the chart. Like it stopped even registering. And I realized then that that was the wrong advice. And I had to come back down, right? I had to figure it out. And that's when I ended up and did the total elimination diet right after that because I had to get my type 2 diabetes under control. The problem is I did it too long and it backfired again on me for being too low carb. Um, so, you you have to find a happy medium, right? And I can't we can't sit on here and say, "Well, April, we think you should have this," or, "Sly, you should have this." We can't do that. Now, individually, when we do our clients, we work with you one-on-one, we get a lot more granular with folks. We get a lot more like, you know, what are your goals? How active are you? Like Becky said, I mean, it really depends. Right now, Becky is she calls it in the dungeon, but she's working out. And so her requirements are way different than mine. I'm sedentary. I've been working on a project right now where I literally am lucky to get maybe, I don't know, 900 steps a day because I'm sitting in front of the computer and I can't take breaks, or very little breaks. And I certainly can't go far because the next class is going to start up. So on those days, I have to really pay attention to what I'm eating because, again, if I'm sedentary and I'm not doing anything, you better believe that I'm going to adjust what I'm eating. But out on the property and we're doing we're doing some manual labor out there, yeah, my food looks a little different on those days. So I think people are scared. I think I've talked to too many people that I'm afraid I'm going to gain my weight back. That scares me to death. I'm afraid, my diabetes is going to get worse, or I have to fast because that's what my influencer is saying to do. Um, and the fact is, and how many times do you and I talk about this on the phone that we're like, stop following those people. Stop trying to do what they're doing. We are all individual. It just, it's so sad in a lot of ways. It breaks both of our hearts when we see people try to mimic those influencers out there. And then you start looking at some of those influencers, and you can see just by looking at them that they don't look healthy. Meaning, there's some of them that I've looked at and went, their hair's thinning. Like, that's not good, right? You and I've talked
Mhm,
about that, right, Becky?
mhm. Yep. Yeah, I've definitely, been able to see the different signs of people that are restricting on certain macros. They're following, just the overall. And I think that's where people end up and need to really pursue what works for them, not be dogmatic. And that's why when I post my meal prep, I don't give, there's this many ounces of
Right.
protein, or there's this macro, or there's, yes, I'll end up and I'll post it. And I've had people ask, well, how big is the bowl? How big is the container? How, it's what works for me. Yes, I just gave you the basic guideline as far as what I use. So technically you can figure out what my meal prep is. But I can guarantee I'm watching the comments on Instagram, and the formula that was put into the comment over there, and I'm not going to end up and specify it, but no, that is not the formula that I would use in regards of using or a good place of starting as far as the protein amount, because that is way higher on protein than what I will typically end up and recommend even for my coaching clients. Again, I'm not referencing what they are referring to, but no, that is not the amount I use. So if you want to get a good reference, because a lot of people are asking in regards of the specifics, right? I gave how to do it without, the 4 to 6 ounces as far as using your hand. But if you are looking at a day, then I would end up and if you want to use the kilograms, I would start with the 1.5 per kilogram of body weight. If you're somewhere between
Ideal.
ideal body weight, yes. If you're starting somewhere between that, and if you want to use the pounds, then I would end up and use the 0.75. So if you take the 0.75 times your ideal body weight, that is where I would end up and use that as a reference of a starting point. Go up, go down to the kilogram side, if that is what your body needs. But as far as if you're active, if you're lifting, if you're doing all of that, sure, you may be able to go up a little bit more. But based on that formula that was put in my Instagram chat, no, that is well more than what most people I find in clients need.
Right. Well, one of the things that you have to be careful, and so I'm getting a certification right now. I'm working on that, and it was referenced, and they backed it up with studies. It's a very good class that I'm doing. And like I said, I'm going to get certified. And it was talking about losing lean muscle mass, and just under eating alone you'll lose muscle mass, like
Mm-hmm.
that alone. And that is part of, like elderly people, things like that, how quickly they can lose their muscle mass and their strength. That's why it's important to do strength training, lifting. You can pick up a can of green beans and use that. But be real careful, because the body is smart. And if you're going to starve it, if you're going to take it down to under eating calories, under eating even the by fasting too much or whatever, you're putting your body into a lot of stress. And there was a point I wanted to make about that. Oh, so when I'll tell you my side of that story. When I tried to do the 1 gram per ideal body weight of protein, do you know what my body did? Becky does.
It
I gained
ended up
weight,
in, yep, as to say,
and
it
my blood
backfired with you.
it backfired, and my blood sugar jacked up. My body went, you're not going to give me any carbs, so we are going to take this excess protein that you're eating, and we're going to convert it because we need it. You're not giving it to us. We're going to need. We are going to use it. We're going to convert it, and we're going to hang on to it because you're starving us. And it's a huge warning. I am putting a huge warning out there. And again, if you are confused, you don't know where to start, you want some guidance, Becky and I are both coaches. We can help you. I can help you. She can help you. We can hone you in and get you started. But you know what? You're not going to weigh and measure for long, because
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get you to the point that you can look at that palm size and go, I know how much I'm getting. And that's what we want to teach. I always go back to everybody wants the Weight Watcher point system. How much can I have? Please tell me exactly what I can eat. That's what my latest client did. She said, you can tell me the amounts to eat. And I said, nope, not right now. We're going to just eat off this list right now. Let's just get you started. And, but again, they were looking for that precise, like, what do I do? And it's like, you aren't ready. But, um, but again, even Becky and I change up what we're doing depending on how active we are or not. So I don't know. I hope this helps people. Being able to start kind of where you're at. Let's see. Somebody asked over here, how do you know how much protein is enough for seniors? Go ahead, Becky.
Well, and that's where, as we end up when we age, right?
Hmm.
Again, when I reference the fact of you may need less, you may need more, you may, male, female, it's all going to end up and vary. And so to prevent the sarcopenia, because that
Yep.
does end up and happen, you've got one, I would make sure that you are doing some form of strength training, even if it's just body weight, to help with that muscle. But then I would make sure that you are getting enough in a meal. And so how do you know that you're getting enough? Well, ideally, the only way to truly know that you are preventing sarcopenia is to do something like a DEX scan or a bod pod, those type of a test. But if you shoot somewhere between 25 at bare minimum and 35, ideally 30 to 35 grams in a meal, you're going to be at a good range. And that's where, for most people, I would at least try to hit somewhere. Again, if you need a little bit more, up to that 40, so that the body can end up and metabolize it. You don't feel like you've got a brick sitting in your gut. You also don't create any type of unwanted responses. And ideally, hopefully everyone can kind of take away from this that food is fuel. It's not necessarily complicated math equations of percentages and micromanaging the macros, but freeing yourself from that food obsession, really learning to get into that new intuitive side of nourishing your body, not letting the fear mongering of a lot of people on social media right now saying that, carbs are bad, that we shouldn't consume them, because that's not necessarily the case. Yes, some of them, the carbs end up and have anti-nutrients. Not going to end up and disagree on that point, but it's not necessarily that they're out to kill you. And when you're really worrying and fearing about this food, that stress ends up and creates even more of an issue than what the food does, right? It creates the cortisol response, it creates an insulin response, and it's actually worse for your metabolism on that front. So sometimes just stepping back and really, embracing. And that's why I get so passionate also about the seasonal eating and supporting your body's natural rhythms. Which reminds me, we have the nutrition meeting over in BNC following this. So, really planning that out and having something prepared so that you don't have decision fatigue. It helps to reduce the stress, reduces temptation to foods that, the unwanted carb type food. So having that control, it's all about fail to plan to fail. So planning is freedom in this aspect of, being able to figure it out, but not necessarily be tied to
And again, if anyone is looking for coaching from either one of us, if you go to the BNC community.com, we have our coaching links on there. You can we'll come alongside of you. We will help you out. So if you do want that extra guidance, we definitely are here for you. So, again, go to bncommunity.com and you'll find both of our links to our calendars where you can get signed up and we can help you out. So hopefully this hit home for some people.
Yeah. Yep. And like I said, I see the comment, this was good. I realize I need guidance. The brain fog makes it hard. Absolutely. Reach out. We're happy to help. We have a whole community that is also willing to help. So reach out for one-on-one coaching. Any of us coaches are more than happy to help you on the journey.
Absolutely. Well, for it starting out with our technical difficulties, this has definitely ended on a good note, didn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So YouTube, I appreciate you. Instagram, I appreciate you guys for hanging out. And we will see you next Monday. Have a wonderful evening.